Just a glimpse of some of the campaign events there. Pat McFadden, welcome to you this Sunday morning. Now, alongside a few laughs on the campaign trail, whoever wins next week is going to have to confront some extremely serious issues. And if Keir Starmer wins, he'll be on a plane in a matter of days to a NATO summit in Washington and then hosting a huge summit of European leaders here in the UK. And not so long ago, Keir Starmer said national security is the most important issue of our times. Why then has he not committed to spending 2.5% of GDP on defence? Well, he has, and he was in fact saying that before Rishi Sunak did. Two things I'd say about it. First of all, the last time defence spending was at 2.5% of GDP was when Labour was in power. Conservatives, of course, have been in for 14 years, have had 14 years to reach that figure, have never done so. Now they say they want to do it. We actually said before they said that we wanted to do it. But there's another point about this too, which is, like everything, we want to show financial responsibility about this and make sure that we can pay for it. And I think one of the features of this campaign, which we've had some criticism for from some quarters, is showing a significantly greater degree of financial responsibility than the Conservatives. The point about defence spending, though, is you haven't committed to a date of when you would spend that money. And anyone in Westminster, anyone in Whitehall would tell you, and would tell our viewers this morning, that without a date, that is not a meaningful commitment. So why has Keir Starmer not given an explicit commitment with a date to spend 2.5% of the size of the economy of GDP on defence? If he really believes that national security is his first priority, it's the most important thing, why has he not made a political choice to put that at the top of the list? Because a date without a proper plan to pay for it is also not a meaningful commitment. And I'm afraid that when I look at the Conservative manifesto, I see a desperate wish list of unfunded commitments, and the money for them, the Chancellor has admitted, and we're going to talk to the Prime Minister shortly. So and as everybody in that chair, what is the point in producing a date has in the last few weeks? How are you going to pay for it? I'm just going to make this point to you. As everybody in that chair last week, our viewers have told us very clearly they want our politicians who are here to stick to talking about their own plans and their own policy. And I'm asking you why Keir Starmer has made the political choice not to make this commitment, because you have made commitments to some things, but not to this particular target. Why? Because he wants to show for everything he commits to exactly how it's going to be paid for. And after the experience that we had just a couple of years ago, we see the cost of making commitments when you can't do that. And the cost isn't paid by politicians, isn't paid in interviews like this. The cost is paid by people in their own family finances. So we want to be responsible. He has made a commitment to spend money on some other things, and it is interesting that he's chosen not to make a commitment to this increase to defence spending, even though at a time when he says in his own words, national security is the most important issue of our times. This is a big year for elections, and if Keir Starmer wins, of course, I know he always says that he would want to work with whoever is in the White House. But all of our viewers would have seen President Biden's performance in the debate in the US the other night. Are you concerned for Joe Biden? Should he step aside? Look, I think it was a tough night for the Democrats the other night, but I've got one election to worry about, and I'm focused on that. And whoever wins the American election in November, the relationship between Britain and the United States will be as strong as it's ever been. And it's for the American people to decide who they elect as their president. But it is a real time when there are elections going on in so many places. There's voting in France today, and there's concern among some in France that Marine Le Pen's party may win, a woman that the Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lamon has called a fascist. Why should people believe that a potential Labour government could work well with the French government? You have to work with whoever another country elects. It's a basic rule of diplomacy. I only have a vote in this country. I have to focus on this election, and whoever becomes Prime Minister on Thursday as a result of our election will have to vote or work with whoever the French elect, whoever the United States elect. This is true right around the world. But these issues matter so much because Labour's political fortunes, if elected, will, as well as what you might want to do in government, be affected so much about what happens in other countries. We all have felt that because of the war in Ukraine that resulted in an energy shock. Now, Labour's plan, the party's talked about it a lot, is to create this organisation called GB Energy, But a lot of our viewers have got in touch with us saying, what is it really? Would GB Energy actually be a company that produces energy that ends up being pumped into people's homes?
It's a publicly owned company that's designed to drive the investment in some of the new technologies we're going to need in the coming years, in solar, in wind, in hydrogen, and so on. And in doing so, in the government stepping up to the plate, making sure that the private sector does too, because one of the things that's clouded this debate and maybe made it less clear than it might be is all around the world, countries trying to meet this transition, the vast majority of what's spent will be spent by the private sector. But we believe there is a real role for a publicly owned company to help to make a market for some of these new technologies in a way that the private sector is holding back from at the moment. And when you do that, you get the benefit of releasing that private sector investment too.
But one of the reasons it's been confusing is because representatives from the Labour Party have said different things about this from time to time. So I'll ask you again, can you be really clear? Will it be a company that will produce energy that will then be pumped into people's homes? Or will it merely, as you suggest, be an investment vehicle, essentially writing cheques to encourage other companies to do the same?
It's not going to sit alongside npower or RWE or these companies. This is a different thing. This is a publicly owned company that is investing in making sure that we have the jobs of the future in these new technologies, that releases the private sector so that Britain plays a leading role in this transition. And the reason it's had quite a lot of support, the reason that Patrick Vallance, for example, has backed it so strongly after his experience with what we had to do during COVID, is because this transition is coming anyway. So every country has a choice. And either you step up to the plate and try to be a leader in it, or you're just going to end up buying the technology, buying the kit, and buying the advances from other countries. Now, Britain, with its great tradition of creativity and innovation, we want to be in the lead of that change, not just a customer for it.
But if it's not going to produce its own cheap energy that'll go directly into people's homes, our viewers like Simon Boyce are wondering, when will I start saving £300, as stated by Labour? You've repeatedly claimed it will save people £300 a year. How?
Because in the long term, if we have renewables, they are cheaper than relying on oil and gas. And this company will drive the transition to renewables, and renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels. And if we stand back from this, we're just at the mercy of the international fossil fuel market. I don't want to stand you back.
I want you to explain in detail how you'll save people £300 a year, because that's a big promise to put out there.
Because if your energy is created by renewables, the price that the renewables cost compared to oil and gas in international markets, that is a cheaper way to do it. So it's both better for energy security and better for people in their household bills.
Actually, when you look at the workings, you have been repeatedly claiming you're going to save people £300 a year. And we've looked at this based on an estimate calculated from bills from last summer, when energy was already cheaper. And the estimate is based on an aspiration of almost decarbonising the economy by 2030. It's not even based on Labour's plans, this figure. So unless you can explain otherwise, we should point out to viewers this £300 is an estimate based on figures that are out of date and produced by a think tank. It's not even based on your own workings.
This is the payoff that people can get from producing their energy by renewables rather than relying on oil and gas. And it's based on the average sum that a household pays for energy in the current mix compared to what we could be doing in the future. And you mentioned 2030. We want to be ambitious about 2030.
But are you guaranteeing to people that they'll save £300? Because when you look at the workings, it doesn't look like you can give that guarantee.
That's an estimate based on current prices compared to what we can get to through generation through renewable energy.
So it's an estimate of what you hope we might get to in 6 years' time. So that doesn't sound like something you should be putting all over a leaflet and a poster and making a solemn promise to people in a manifesto that they'll have coming off their monthly budget.
This is a good way to illustrate the benefit of transitioning to renewable energy, because if we don't do that, we are left, as we saw a couple of years ago, at the mercy of international oil and gas prices. We're also at the mercy of who controls those fossil fuels, and we saw the kind of energy blackmail that Vladimir Putin attempted to put on Europe, and to release ourselves from that is both better for energy security and better for household bills.
Brexit has been a big issue for your party. Many people, including you, were very unhappy about it. Keir Starmer talks quite vaguely of wanting to have a better relationship with the EU and a better trading relationship in the EU. Can you tell us if anyone in the European Union who has told the Labour Party you can get a bigger deal without having to give quite a lot back?
These things are always a negotiation. I've not been involved in that. I've been running the campaign. But I think we can do better than where we are at the moment.
But what do you base that on, though? So it's one thing to say, of course, you'd like to have a better relationship, but there is a strong feeling, and plenty of people in Brussels on the other side of the channel would say this, we're not going to give any potential new UK government anything new, any shiny new presents or any better deal unless we get something in return. And that may well mean a new deal on migrants, possibly getting involved in some kind of returns deal, or bringing back some form of freedom of movement. So I ask you again, it's an important point. Has anybody on the EU side indicated to Labour there is a better deal on offer without giving something back in return?
Well, we're not going back into free movement. We're not going to rerun that argument. These things are a negotiation, but every country negotiates in its own interests. And if we entered a discussion like that and we thought it wasn't in our own interest, then we wouldn't do it. But I think the point is to try. The point is to say, can we do better than we are doing at present? Can we deal with some of these barriers to trade that are affecting so many of our businesses? I think we can. I think it's worth the effort. But of course, at the end of the day, if we were in a negotiation where we thought the end product wasn't going to be in the national interest, then we wouldn't do it.
So you can't guarantee that you'll get a better deal. I mean, a bit like the £300, that's an estimate, that's an aspiration. A better trading relationship with the EU is something that you're aspiring to. It's not something you can guarantee to any of our viewers this morning.
It's a negotiation, of course it is.
And in terms, though, of that deal, would you rule out ever putting freedom of movement up as part of a negotiation?
Yeah, we're not going back to freedom of movement.
Categorically, even some kind of deal for younger people to be able to move around or study abroad?
Keir's been clear on this. We don't want to rerun the Brexit argument. That means no grand institutional design and no return to free movement.
And if, as Keir Starmer often talks about, Labour manages to win and introduces what he terms as a decade of renewal, would you rule out some kind of big institutional change, perhaps going back into the customs union, perhaps even discussing going back into the EU in a second Labour term?
Oh, I'd like to get a first Labour term, Laura. And, you know, when it comes to the future, I think the leadership task for anybody who wins on Thursday is to make the best possible future that the UK can outside the EU. That's the leadership task. We're not going to rerun the argument.
And finally, Pat McFadden, we've had a lot of politicians, you know, showing off a bit during this campaign. That's what campaigns are about. Of course, politicians are always very welcome to try to show off in the studio. But we want to ask everybody this morning, what's a mistake that you have made?
A mistake that I've made in the campaign? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. I've spent most of the campaign in Labour Party headquarters, in lots of meetings, so I've not been taking the Ed Davey risk of the water slide or falling off a kayak or whatever it was he was in. I've probably had a more sheltered campaign than people who've been out and about in the country.
But do you think Labour has made any mistakes in the campaign?
I think we've run a good campaign. I'm proud of the campaign that we've run. I think we've put forward real and meaningful change and done it with an eye on responsibility because of the legacy that we're going to get after 14 years of the Tories. But change will only come if people vote for it on Thursday.
So you can't think of any mistakes, or none that you're willing to tell us about?
I'm proud of what we've done.
OK, Pat McFadden, Campaign Chief, thank you very much indeed for joining us on our last Sunday of the election campaign.